This is Norman Kissinger from Redeeming the Time Brothers Ministries, and the last devotion that I did was speaking about the idea of the fact that the nation had completely lost its ability to understand or know what truth was, and not just in the idea of in a spiritual sense, like, you know, one person thinking that the Muslim faith is correct, and another person thinking that the Christian faith or the Hindu faith or that their spiritual views were right or wrong. But actually in the lines of we have gotten to the place where we simply don't even understand truth as is reasonable in the physical realm. And so people are starting to announce things to be true that simply are not true even in the natural realm, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, that just shows how lost we've become. And I won't go back over that devotion again, but I would say that I wanted to talk basic 101 devotions on the idea of truth and just basically what the Bible would say about truth. So our first idea here would be found in Psalms chapter 43, verse 3. And the psalmist says, "Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me, let them bring me to your holy hill and to your tabernacle." Now, several things about this passage here the psalmist is saying that I think is interesting. Number one, I want you to notice that when it talks about truth, that in the passage, truth comes from God. Truth is something that we probably don't have the ability to be able to understand on our own without knowing God and His creation and how He made us. We don't have the ability to understand, comprehend the idea of what truth is. And so the psalmist is crying out for divine revelation, the idea that we have to have a revelation outside of ourselves in order to know if something is there, if it's true, if it's not true, and that we have to have a benchmark. We've got to have a lighthouse. We've got to have some way to anchor what we believe onto something. And the Bible is very specific that we anchor our beliefs, that we should be anchoring our beliefs on the divine revelation of what God says about Himself. Now, we can also anchor our beliefs without going absolutely as nutty as the culture is getting on the idea that there's the physical world out here that is real. So if I jump off a building, I'm going to die. So the physical world is very real, and we can anchor ourselves to that. But when it comes especially to spiritual the world, we can anchor ourselves in the truth of God's word being true. And so he says, "Send out your light and your truth," the psalmist said. And it's interesting where he says that this would lead us. The whole point of truth should ultimately be to lead us to God. So at the end of the verse here, he says, "Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your tabernacle." And so God's light, which is often a word that's used in place of truth, God's light and God's truth should lead us back to a relationship with Him. It's kind of interesting that when we talk about lies, that Satan is the father of lies, as we would say that God is incapable of lying. So God is all truth, and Satan and the kingdom of darkness are all lies. In order for us to sin, we must lie to ourselves or believe a lie or practice a lie. There's light and there's darkness. There's no middle of the road between those two. So we find truth, and again, we could have went into 100 passages to talk about this, but we find truth when we go to look for truth in God and in His Word. He is the measure of what is true and what is not true. Okay, what is true and what is not true. And so we can trust Him to have an anchor for truth. And by the way, this is something that with religion may be getting crazy out there, even sometimes the Christian faith, that maybe this is not true. But at one time at least, it was commonly known that people tended to do better in the psychological world or in mental health if they were anchored to some sort of a religion or spirituality. Okay, and I don't know that necessarily would prove itself out to be true today because of the change of religion, unfortunately, and spirituality is not so much anchored in truth any longer. But it does, in my opinion, show that we do better, and I believe we do better as humans when we are anchored to something. And we're not driven by every wind of doctrine, as the New Testament talks about. So I think we as Christians, the rest of the world, I'm going to say this again many times, the rest of the world should maybe be confused by this, but the Christian should not be confused by the idea that there is an ultimate truth, and we can find that ultimate truth in God's Word, in Jesus Christ, in His divine revelation. We can find that ultimate truth. And so Christians should stand on truth and be the rock to the world that is losing a grasp of reality. And in fact, that's the last thing that we'll be doing as things become more dark and more light, as there's less dividing line or gray areas, that we will be that place where we will be the light, and we should stand on truth, regardless if we understand it, regardless if we have the power to follow it, regardless if we agree with it. We should stand on the truth of God's Word, because that is the anchor for our soul. This is Norman Kissinger from Redeeming the Time Brothers Ministries. Be sure and watch my brother's podcast, and listen to his podcast, and watch his devotions on a daily basis. They'll just bless your heart. Thank you all. God bless you, and you just have a great day.